Today's story is so dangerous, it turned a quiet saloon into a courtroom, and a peaceful town into a battlefield of truth. Out here in the Old West, under flickering lantern light and creaking floorboards, destinies collide where law and greed cross paths. It started with something almost invisible. A calm voice at the bar, refusing to bow to a bully. And that single refusal awakened justice that had been buried for years. Before we kick off this adventure, don't forget to hit like on the video and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Mortimer Crowell stood near the center of the saloon, thumbs hooked into his tailored vest, a gold watch chain catching the lamplight. Whiskey had flushed his face, the look of a man long used to obedience. The stranger at the bar didn't even glance his way. Dust still clung to the man's coat and boots, his silver beard rough with the trail. He simply lifted his glass and drank, solid as bedrock. "Are you hard of hearing?" Crowell snapped, his voice rising. "When I enter a room, men stand. That's how respect works around here." Hank Tolliver's hands froze over the bar. 3 of the Red Creek hands at a corner table fell silent. Everyone in town knew Crowell's temper, knew how he'd bought half the valley and crushed anyone foolish enough to cross him. Whoever this old man was, he had just invited trouble. The stranger finally spoke, his voice low, dry as wind cutting through canyon stone. "I respect what's earned," he said calmly. "Not what's bought." Crowell's face darkened to a furious shade of red. He snapped his fingers sharply, like calling a dog. "Ridley, get in here, now!" The shout carried through the batwing doors and out into the street. "We've got a drifter causing trouble," Crowell barked. "Disrespecting a public official. Toss him in a cell for the night, maybe longer." Boot steps approached, measured, steady. Sheriff Evan Ridley pushed through the doors, one hand resting near his holster out of habit. He was young, barely 30, but he wore the badge with purpose. His eyes swept the room, then locked onto the stranger's back. Ridley stopped cold. The old man slowly turned on his stool. Lamplight washed over a face carved by years of sun and hard decisions. His eyes were pale, winter cold, sharp and unafraid. A scar cut from temple to jaw, white against weathered skin. His right hand rested near his hip, close to a worn holster darkened by age and oil. Ridley's face drained of color. His hand fell away from his gun as if burned. For 3 long heartbeats, no one moved. Then the sheriff's boots snapped together. His spine straightened, and his hand rose in a crisp salute. "Marshal Wyatt Ashford?" Ridley said, voice tight. "Sir." The word hit the room like thunder. Marshal, not deputy, not sheriff. Federal authority. Crowell's mouth opened and closed without sound. His complexion faded from rage to ash. Around the saloon, men shifted uneasily, recognition spreading like a chill. One of the Red Creek hands whispered a name, barely audible, like a prayer. Wyatt Ashford, the ghost of the territories. The marshal who hunted the Hendricks gang across 3 states. The lawman who cleaned Deadwood when it was nothing but blood and claim theft. The man who faced 12 armed jumpers in Tombstone and walked away while they bled in the dust. Every outlaw west of the Mississippi knew that name. Every honest lawman respected it. Every crooked official feared it. Ashford's eyes never left Mortimer Crowell. He didn't return the salute, didn't acknowledge it at all. He stood there, calm as a Sunday morning, one hand near his gun, the other holding his whiskey. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of decades behind a badge. "Your sheriff understands the law, Mayor," Ashford said, setting his glass down softly. "You might want to learn it." Crowell's hands trembled as they slipped from his vest. Sweat gathered at his temples despite the cool night air drifting through the doors. His mind raced. Calculations, exits, leverage. He'd built Red Creek through threats, bribes, and paperwork. But a federal marshal? That was different. That was dangerous. Marshal Ashford, Crowell said at last, forcing a smile that never reached his eyes. I apologize. A misunderstanding. If you'd known who I was, Ashford cut in quietly, you would have kept your mouth shut. The words were soft, final. That's the trouble with men like you, Ashford continued. You only show respect when fear teaches it. Ridley remained at attention, eyes shifting between the marshal and the mayor, reading the tension like a rising flood. The saloon had gone deathly still. Even Hank Tolliver had stopped wiping the counter. Ashford took a slow sip of whiskey. I came to Red Creek for a drink and a bed. Nothing more. His gaze swept the room, settling briefly on faces that turned away. But I've been here 15 minutes, and I've already heard plenty about how this town really works. He looked back at Crowell. About who runs it. About folks who vanish when they refuse to sell their land. Crowell's jaw tightened. Those are lies, Mortimer Crowell snapped. Just rumors stirred up by bitter troublemakers. Wyatt Ashford's voice dropped, colder than before. Funny thing about rumors, Mayor. In my experience, where that much smoke gathers, there's usually fire underneath. The words lingered, sharp and exposed. Evan Ridley's hand drifted closer to his holster, not in threat, but in readiness. Protective. He served the town, sure, but his loyalty to the badge ran deeper than any salary. Crowell's tight smile began to fracture. His eyes flicked toward the doors, gauging distance, weighing escape. But running now would mean confession. Weakness. He'd built his power on the belief that he was untouchable, that Red Creek belonged to him. If he bolted, the illusion would shatter. Marshal, he said stiffly, this town operates by the book. The words rushed out too fast, too sharp. We maintain law and order here. Sheriff Ridley can confirm that. Every gaze turned toward Ridley. His face stayed firm, unreadable, but something stirred behind his eyes. Conflict, or maybe relief, as if he'd been waiting for someone powerful enough to finally ask the questions he couldn't. You're welcome to review our records, sir, Ridley said carefully. Everything's filed properly. Arrests, complaints. All land transactions are logged with the county clerk. Ashford never looked away from Crowell. I'm sure they are, Sheriff. Men like the mayor, he thought, were always meticulous. Paper clean, ink dry, lies well organized. Ashford drained his whiskey in a single swallow and set the glass down with quiet finality. But paper doesn't explain why Martha Holloway sold her ranch for half its value 3 days after her barn burned to the ground, Ashford said evenly. And it doesn't explain why the man who saw who lit that fire left town the same night and was never seen again. Crowell's face hardened. That fire was investigated, he snapped. Ruled an accident. By whom? Ashford asked. By Sheriff Ridley? Following procedure or following pressure? The words cut deep. I know how this works, Mayor, Ashford continued. Men like you squeeze good lawmen until they're forced to choose between their badge and their conscience. Ridley's jaw clenched. He said nothing. He didn't need to. A chair scraped violently against the floor. One of the Red Creek hands stood up. Young, barely 20, with burned scars climbing his palms and wrists. His voice shook, but he spoke anyway. Marshal, sir, I worked for Martha Holloway. The words spilled out, rushed and desperate. That fire wasn't no accident. I saw 3 men ride up, saw him pour kerosene, saw him set it alight. Crowell spun on him. You shut your mouth, Caleb Rowan, or what? Ashford asked quietly. He hadn't reached for his gun, but his hand moved close enough that Crowell froze mid-threat. You plan on threatening a witness in front of a federal marshal? Caleb swallowed, fear flickering, but he held firm. One of them men wore a silver ring, 3 diamonds. He raised his shaking hand. I've seen that ring before. On your hand, Mayor. On your foreman's, too. On your brother's. You hand them out to the men who stay loyal. Ridley's eyes widened slightly. Pieces clicked into place. Suspicions he'd buried now had a voice. Crowell's fists clenched. For a split second, naked violence flashed across his face, then vanished beneath feigned outrage. This is absurd, he barked. Drunk ranch hand nonsense. Half the territory wears silver rings. I can find out, Ashford said calmly. The words hit like iron. I can investigate. Subpoena records. Bring in territorial judges who don't owe you favors. I can tear this town open until every dirty deal, every burned barn, every missing witness comes into the light. He paused. The real question is whether you want me to. Crowell's composure finally cracked. Rage and panic twisted his features. You don't have jurisdiction here, he spat. This is municipal business, not federal. You don't get to ride in and arson, intimidation, forcing citizens to sell land under threat. Ashford interrupted, counting each charge on his fingers. That becomes federal when it crosses county lines, which I suspect it does. When it interferes with mail routes, like the one running through Holloway's land. His voice turned glacial. When it forms a pattern of organized crime. Ashford leaned forward slightly. I've seen men hang for less, Crowell, and I've got the authority to see it happen again. Ridley stepped forward then, resolve settling into his stance. Marshal, he said firmly, if you're opening an investigation, I have records, things I kept separate from official files. He met Ashford's gaze. Names, dates, irregularities I wasn't allowed to explain. Or truths he'd never been allowed to speak. Mortimer Crowell felt his world caving in. Each word dropped into the room like another nail sealing his empire shut. His eyes swept the saloon, hunting for allies, for anyone willing to stand with him. He found none. The faces staring back were cold or carefully blank. Fear had kept them quiet for years. Now fear was losing its grip. The presence of a federal marshal cracked something open. Hank Tolliver spoke first, his voice shaking. He threatened my daughter, Marshal. Every head turned. Said, if I ever talked about what I heard in here, the deals, the orders, she'd have an accident. Hank swallowed hard. I sent her to Kansas City, to live with her aunt. Haven't seen her in 8 months. That broke the dam. A rancher stepped forward, talking about his creek being blocked upstream until he sold his land. A shopkeeper followed, describing how his competitor's store burned to the ground after refusing Crowell's offer. Voices stacked on voices, years of intimidation and corruption spilling out across the floorboards. Crowell's hand twitched, darting toward his coat pocket. Evan Ridley's revolver cleared leather in an instant, the hammer snapping back loud in the sudden hush. Don't, the sheriff warned. Wyatt Ashford hadn't moved, not an inch. He stood relaxed, almost indifferent. But his eyes tracked Crowell's hand like a hawk tracking prey. You draw on a federal officer, Ashford said calmly, and you won't live long enough to regret it. Crowell froze. Sweat streamed down his temples. His breathing went short and ragged. He was trapped, and he knew it. Every eye in the saloon pinned him in place. Every testimony tightened the noose. The empire he'd built with money and fear was collapsing in real time. "This isn't over," Crowell hissed. "I've got lawyers, connections in the territorial capital." "You had friends," Ashford corrected softly. "But friends scatter when the law comes knocking. They always do." He turned slightly toward Ridley. "Sheriff, I'm placing Mortimer Crowell under arrest pending federal investigation." Ashford's voice remained steady as stone. "Charges include arson, intimidation, conspiracy to defraud, and attempted assault on a federal officer." Ridley stepped forward with the cuffs. Crowell staggered backward, bumping hard into a table, panic replacing calculation. "You can't prove any of this," Crowell spat. "It's hearsay. No evidence. No Briggs Hollow?" Ashford interrupted. Crowell went still. "The man wearing the silver ring," Ashford continued evenly, "standing outside the back door right now, deciding whether to run." A thin, sharp smile crossed Ashford's face. "I saw him when I walked in. Followed him here. He's heard everything." The color drained from Crowell's face. The trap closed. His knees buckled. He dropped heavily into a chair, the fight leaving him all at once. Ridley moved in, pulled his arms back, and snapped the cuffs shut. The metallic click echoed through the silent saloon. No one cheered, no one spoke. They just watched as a tyrant fell. "I'll need statements from everyone who spoke tonight," Ashford said to the room. "Written, signed, witnessed." He nodded toward Ridley. "The sheriff will coordinate. If you've been threatened, pressured, or forced to act against your will, now's the time." Heads nodded. Caleb Rowan straightened, fear giving way to something like pride. Hank Tolliver stared toward the door, already thinking of the letter he'd write to his daughter. Quiet conversations began to rise. Stories shared, truths compared. The silence of fear was breaking. Ridley hauled Crowell toward the exit. The mayor shuffled like a condemned man, head down, boots dragging. As they passed, Crowell looked up at Ashford, venom burning in his eyes. "You should have taken your drink and left, old man." Ashford met his stare without blinking. "Protecting citizens has been my job for 30 years, he said. "I've never walked away from it." He paused. "Not even when the badge gets heavy." Ridley led Crowell out into the cooling night. Through the saloon windows, the Red Creek kin watched as their mayor was marched down Main Street toward the jail. By morning, the whole county would know. By next week, the territorial papers would carry the headline, "The Fall of Red Creek's Corrupt Empire." Ashford turned back to the bar and gestured for another whiskey. Hank Tolliver poured with trembling hands, then waved away the coins Ashford set down. "On the house, Marshal," Hank Tolliver said. "Hell, anything you drink in this town from here on out is free." Wyatt Ashford shook his head. "I appreciate it," he said evenly, "but I always pay my way." He left the coins on the bar anyway, clean and deliberate. Nearby, Caleb Rowan stepped forward, hat clutched in both hands, unsure at first. "Marshal, thank you," he said quietly, "for making it safe to speak." He swallowed. "I've been carrying that guilt for months. Watching Martha Holloway lose everything, knowing I might have stopped it." "You did stop it," Ashford replied. "Tonight." He glanced down at the young man's scarred hands. "Takes more courage than most folks have." Caleb nodded. got burned fighting the fire, tried to save the horses, got 3 out before the roof collapsed. Ashford studied him for a moment, then gave a slow nod. Good man. He turned to the room. I'll be staying in Red Creek a week, maybe 2, long enough to take statements, gather evidence, and lock this investigation down tight. His voice carried, steady and calm. Anyone with information, anyone who's been threatened, anyone who needs protection, my door's open. A murmur rolled through the saloon. The tight pressure that had filled the place for years finally began to loosen. People started speaking normally again, breathing easier, laughing even. Mortimer Crowell's shadow was lifting. Outside, the night air smelled of dust and coming rain. Ashford stepped onto the saloon porch and looked down Red Creek's main street. Lamplight glowed in windows. Somewhere, a dog barked. Ordinary sounds, what a town was supposed to sound like once the rot was cut away. From down the road, Evan Ridley emerged from the jail, walking with purpose. His face was serious, but lighter than before. The weight of compromise, of looking the other way, had begun to fall off his shoulders. "Marshal," Ridley said as he reached the porch, "I owe you an apology. I should have stood up to him sooner. Should have found a way to—" "You did what you could with what you had," Ashford cut in. "And you kept records. That matters." He held Ridley's gaze. A lot of lawmen would have burned the evidence and lived with it. Ridley shook his head. "I couldn't. My father wore a badge. Taught me it meant something." His voice tightened. "But Crowell had leverage. My mother's medical bills, my sister's tuition. He paid them. And made sure you knew he could stop any time," Ashford said quietly. Ridley nodded. "I thought I could work inside the system, limit the damage, keep my family safe." Ashford's expression softened. "That's not weakness. That's being human." He reached into his coat, pulled out a cigar, and offered one. Both men lit up, smoke curling into the dark. "But now you've got backup," Ashford said. "Federal authority." "That changes everything," Ridley replied. "What happens next?" Ashford exhaled slowly. "Tomorrow I wire the High Plains marshals. Request full support. Another marshal, maybe a federal prosecutor." The cigar tip glowed red. "We build the case the right way. Every burned barn, every forced sale, every threat. We follow the money," he continued. "Then we take it to a territorial judge." Ridley nodded. "Crowell won't go quietly. He's got money, lawyers." "And we've got witnesses," Ashford said. "Physical evidence, and your records." His voice was absolute. "Rich men think money makes them untouchable. It doesn't. It just makes the fall hurt more." Hope sparked in Ridley's eyes. "The town will cooperate now." "They already are," Ashford replied. "With me here, folks feel safe enough to talk." He flicked ash into the dirt. "And we need to move fast." Ridley stiffened. "Crowell's people. His foreman, his brother, his hired guns," Ashford said. "They'll scatter once they realize it's over. I can have the frontier wardens sworn in by morning," Ridley said. "Men I trust." "Do it," Ashford replied. "Get them ready, armed, organized." The hunt had begun. "We start making arrests at first light," Wyatt Ashford said, his jaw set. "Anyone who resists, anyone who tries to run, just stacks more charges on themselves." Lightning flared along the horizon. A low roll of thunder followed. The storm was closing in, more than one kind of storm. Inside the jail, Mortimer Crowell sat hunched on a hard wooden bench, head buried in his hands. His silk vest was wrinkled, his carefully oiled hair fallen out of place. The cell reeked of old sweat and despair, the same stench that had clung to every man he'd ever thrown behind these bars for imagined crimes, for defiance, for refusing to kneel. The irony burned. At the desk sat Miles Cutter, a grizzled deputy who'd kept his head down and his nose clean throughout Crowell's reign. He said nothing, just cleaned his rifle with slow, deliberate precision. The message was unmistakable. The old order was finished. Crowell's thoughts raced. Lawyers, if any would still take his calls. Money, soon frozen once the federal case moved forward. Escape, but to where? Every town within 500 miles knew his name, and now they'd know his crimes. He'd built his empire on fear. Now that fear had turned on him, and he was drowning in it. The jail door creaked open. Ashford stepped inside, boots heavy on the planks. He dragged a chair forward, spun it around, and sat with his arms crossed over the back. His eyes studied Crowell with the calm detachment of a man who'd seen every kind of criminal the West could produce. "I'll give you one chance," Ashford said. "Just one." His tone was easy, almost friendly. "You cooperate. You give me names. You tell me how far the rot spread, and I'll recommend leniency. Maybe 15 years instead of a rope." Crowell looked up, eyes bloodshot. "Leniency? For what? You don't have enough to hang me. Arson, you can't prove I ordered it. Intimidation, that's hearsay. There's nothing that'll stand in court." "You sure about that?" Ashford asked. He reached into his vest, pulled out a folded paper, and opened it slowly. "This is a signed statement from Briggs Hollow, your foreman." The words landed like a blow. "Every fire, every threat, every payoff," Ashford continued. "Names, dates, locations." Crowell's face drained of color. "He wouldn't." "He did," Ashford replied. "The moment I told him he could hang beside you or save his own neck." A thin, cold smile crossed Ashford's face. "He chose fast. They always do." "He's lying," Crowell said weakly. "Whatever he said, it's lies." "It matches the evidence," Ashford said, leaning forward. "Kerosene cans in his barn, with residue matching the fires. Ledger entries from your office showing payments lining up with the burn dates. And the silver ring on his finger, with your family crest." Ashford's eyes locked onto Crowell's. "You're finished. The only question now is how many years you sit in a cell before they put you in the ground." Crowell's hands began to shake. His breath came short and shallow. Everything he'd built, every scheme, every threat, gone. All undone by an old man in dusty clothes who'd walked into a saloon looking for a drink. "What do you want?" Crowell whispered. "Names." Ashford's voice hardened. "Who else was involved? Who took your money? Which officials looked the other way? Which judges ruled in your favor because you had leverage?" "I want every rat in this nest," he said, "before I burn it down." Crowell stared at the floor, calculations churning. Self-preservation wrestled with whatever scraps of loyalty he had left. But loyalty required honor, and Crowell had none. He'd used people, bought them, discarded them. They'd do the same to him. "The county clerk," Crowell said at last, barely audible. "Silas Merrow. He altered land records, backdated sales, made paperwork disappear. I paid him $50 a document." Ashford pulled out a small notebook and began writing. "Who else?" "Abram Lockwood," Crowell said quickly. "Judge in Silver City, ruled every dispute my way. Cost me $2,000 over 3 years. The dam broke." "Vernon Slade," he continued. "Deputy marshal out of Albuquerque. Delayed investigations, lost evidence. I paid him in gold, twice a year." From the doorway, Evan Ridley wrote furiously in his own notebook. His face darkened with every name. Men he'd trusted, worked beside, respected, all corrupt, all threads in Crowell's web. "The banker?" Wyatt Ashford asked calmly. Crowell let out a bitter laugh. "Franklin Dawes. He made sure loans came due at just the right time, made sure folks couldn't refinance." Crowell shook his head, gave me first shot at their land before it ever reached auction, took 20% off the top of everything I made. The list didn't stop. Names, crimes, payments, routes, a web of corruption stretching across 3 counties. Ashford filled page after page, his face unreadable, yet his eyes burned with a cold, disciplined fury. This was the enemy he'd spent his life fighting, not lone criminals, but rot built into the system itself. An hour later, Ashford stood outside the jail beneath a sky bright with stars. The storm had passed, leaving the air cool and clean. He lit another cigar, studying his notes by lamplight. By morning, there would be arrests. More statements. The slow, grinding machinery of justice moving forward again. Evan Ridley stepped out beside him, worn thin but steady. "That's a lot of names, Marshal," Ridley said. "Some of them powerful men." Ashford exhaled smoke. "Power without honor is just tyranny waiting to collapse. We take them down one piece at a time," he went on. "Follow the evidence. Make it stick." He looked at the young sheriff. "You ready for this? It's going to get ugly. These men will fight, hire lawyers, call in favors. Maybe worse." Ridley didn't hesitate. "I'm ready. This is why I took the badge. Real law, not the twisted version Crowell forced on this town." Ashford clapped him on the shoulder. "Good man. Get some rest. Tomorrow, we start rebuilding." Sleep came easy to neither of them. In his hotel room, Ashford lay on a hard mattress, staring at the ceiling. He thought about all the towns like Red Creek he'd passed through over 30 years. Some stayed clean, others slid back into rot once he rode on. Justice was never final, only maintained. Behind the jail, Ridley sat at his kitchen table, candlelight flickering as he wrote letters. One to the territorial governor, one to the High Plains marshals requesting support, one to his mother, telling her she no longer needed to accept Crowell's money. Dawn broke cold and clear over Red Creek. Ashford was already awake, dressed, armed. He'd slept barely 3 hours, but years on the trail had taught him to live on less. His Colt was cleaned, oiled, loaded. His Winchester leaned against the wall within reach. He didn't expect trouble, but expecting none was how lawmen died. A knock came as the sun crested the eastern hills. 8 men sworn in," Ridley said when Ashford opened the door. "All solid, all ready." "Good," Ashford replied. "We move at once, split up, hit them at the same time." He buckled on his gun belt, testing the weight. It still felt right after all these years. "You take Silas, Merrow, and Dawes," Ashford said. "They're civilians, shouldn't be armed." "I'll handle Vernon Slade," he added, "and any hired guns who decide to fight." They met the frontier wardens outside the sheriff's office. 8 men ranging from weathered ranchers to young homesteaders. Every one of them carried a rifle or shotgun. Every face was set with purpose. Ridley gave clear orders. Arrest peacefully if possible. Use force only if necessary. No reckless moves. Then they fanned out. Doors were knocked down the line. Men were dragged from sleep. Handcuffs snapped shut. Some surrendered quietly, stunned. Others cursed, demanded lawyers, promised revenge, but none resisted. Men with badges and loaded guns have a way of settling arguments. Silas Merrow was found in his office, already feeding documents into a cast-iron stove. Smoke rolling up the chimney. Ridley kicked the door in, seized him by the collar, and hauled him outside while other wardens pulled what records they could from the flames. Franklin Dawes tried to run. He made it 50 feet before a warden tackled him hard into the dirt. Dawes begged, pleaded, offered money. Ridley stood over him, expression stone cold. "Save it for the judge." Ashford rode alone toward the Briggs Hollow Ranch, 5 miles outside town, where Vernon Slade was said to be staying. The place was quiet. Too quiet. Smoke rose from the chimney. Someone was home. Ashford dismounted 100 yards out, tied his horse to a juniper, and advanced on foot, Winchester in hand. No horses in the corral. No dogs barking. Wrong. He circled wide, using a low ridge for cover. From there, he spotted the barn's back door hanging open. A saddled horse stood inside. Someone was getting ready to run. Ashford moved fast, staying low, using every scrap of terrain. He reached the barn wall and pressed against the weathered boards, listening closely. The hunt wasn't over. Inside the barn, frantic movement echoed, metal buckles clinking, saddlebags rustling as they were shoved full. "Vernon Slade!" Wyatt Ashford shouted. The noise inside froze instantly. "Federal Marshal Wyatt Ashford. You're under arrest. Come out with your hands where I can see them." Silence followed. Then a voice, hoarse, frightened. "I got rights. You can't just—" "You're a deputy marshal who took bribes and buried evidence." Ashford cut in. "Whatever rights you had, you burned them." Ashford racked around into the Winchester. The hard, metallic click carried clear. "Last chance. Walk out now." A gunshot blasted from inside the barn. The bullet punched through the wall inches from Ashford's head. Wood splintered. Ashford dropped, rolled, and came up behind a water trough 20 feet away. His blood was hot now, old instincts taking over. "That was stupid, Slade," Ashford called, his voice flat and cold. "Shooting at a federal officer buys you life in prison or a grave. Give it up." Another shot rang out, wild and high. Slade was panicking, firing blind. Ashford heard a horse snort inside, boots scrambling. Slade was going to make a break for it. Ashford moved fast toward the front of the barn. The main doors stood half open. He saw Slade clearly now, a broad man in his 40s, deputy marshal's badge still pinned to his vest. He was hauling himself into the saddle, rifle in one hand, reins in the other. "Don't!" Ashford shouted, leveling the Winchester. Slade kicked the horse hard. It burst through the doors at a gallop. Slade swung his rifle toward Ashford, finger tightening. The Winchester thundered once. The round struck Slade in the right shoulder, spinning him in the saddle. He fired back out of reflex, the shot going wide. The horse bolted, Slade clinging to the horn with his good hand. Ashford ran, chambered another round, and fired again, this time low, aiming for the dirt ahead of the horse. The shot was perfect. The horse reared violently, throwing Slade hard. He hit the ground like a sack of grain, rifle flying from his grip. He rolled once, gasping, clutching his shattered shoulder. Ashford was on him in seconds. He kicked the rifle away and covered Slade with the Winchester. "Move," Ashford said quietly, "and I'll finish it." Blood soaked Slade's shirt. Bone gleamed white through torn flesh. His face was already draining of color. Shock was setting in. Ashford kept the rifle trained as he pulled rope from his saddle. He bound Slade's good arm tight, then tore off his bandana and wrapped it hard around the wound. Not gentle, effective. Slade groaned, twisting weakly. "Hold still," Ashford warned, "unless you want to bleed out." He cinched the bandage tight. "You're under arrest. Federal charges, bribery, obstruction of justice, attempted murder of a federal officer. You'll hang or rot in a cell. Either way, your badge is finished." Slade's eyes rolled back. He sagged, barely conscious. Ashford poured water from his canteen over Slade's face, forced a swallow between his lips. He needed him alive for trial. It took nearly an hour to get Slade back to town, tied belly down across his own horse. He was unconscious when they reached Red Creek. Dr. Nolan Bryce was already waiting. Evan Ridley had sent a rider when the gunshots echoed through the valley. Dr. Bryce worked on Slade in his office while Ashford gave his account. "Clean shoot," Ridley said after listening. "Justified. Witnesses will confirm Slade fired first." There would still be reports, inquests, statements. By midday, the jail was full. Silas Merrow, Franklin Dawes, Vernon Slade, Briggs Hollow. 4 of Mortimer Crowell's hired men rounded up from a bunkhouse outside town. They sat behind bars, some angry, some terrified, staring at futures that ended in chains. Mortimer Crowell watched them from his own cell, eyes hollow. His empire had collapsed in less than a day. Everyone who'd served him, everyone who'd profited from his schemes, caught or scattered. His accounts were frozen, his property seized. All he had left was the silk vest on his back and the certainty of prison or rope. Ashford stood in the sheriff's office, filling out report after report. His hand cramped from the work. Every shot fired, every arrest, every sworn statement. Justice ran on paperwork as much as principle. Ridley brought him a mug of coffee, black and strong. Wire came in from the High Plains marshals. 2 more marshals and a federal prosecutor. They'll be here in 3 days. "Good," Ashford said, taking a long drink. "We'll have everything ready." He glanced out the window. "Town's handling it better than I expected." Ridley nodded. "People aren't celebrating loud, mostly relieved, talking about rebuilding." He leaned against the desk. "Some already talking about running for mayor in a special election. Decent folks, too. Might finally get honest government." "Might," Ashford said quietly. Years in the saddle had taught him caution. "Or you end up with someone just as crooked," he added, "only smarter about hiding it." "Human nature rarely changes," Wyatt Ashford said quietly. "Then we stay watchful," Evan Ridley replied. "Keep the law strong. That's all we can do." That night, the saloon filled without planning, an honest celebration born of relief. Drinks flowed freely for anyone wearing a badge. The Red Creek kin packed the room, raising glasses to justice, to freedom from fear. Ashford sat on the same bar stool as the night before, nursing the same whiskey. Caleb Rowan bought him one. So did Hank Tolliver. So did a dozen others. Ashford accepted each with thanks, but he paced himself. Getting drunk was for civilians. Lawmen stayed sharp, even when the music was loud and the air felt lighter. Near midnight, an older woman approached. Her face was lined by weather and grief, her hands rough from years of work. She wore black, widow's clothes. Martha Holloway. "Marshal Ashford," she said softly, "I wanted to thank you for what you did, for giving us a chance at justice." Ashford rose and removed his hat. "Ma'am, I'm sorry for your loss, for what was taken from you." "It's not lost forever," she said, a faint smile touching her face. The territorial judge ruled this afternoon. All of Crowell's forced purchases are void. She drew a steady breath. "We get our land back, all of it. I'm going home tomorrow, going to rebuild." "That's good news," Ashford said. Something warm settled in his chest. Not pride, but purpose. The reason he'd worn a badge for 30 years. "You'll need help?" he asked. She nodded. "Already have it. Half the town volunteered." Her voice trembled just slightly. Turns out, when you're not afraid anymore, people want to do right. They usually do, Ashford said. Fear just makes them forget. He placed his hat back on his head. If you need anything, tell Sheriff Ridley. He's a good man. He'll see you're protected. The celebration thinned as the hour grew late. People drifted home tired, but hopeful. Ashford walked back to his hotel alone, boots echoing along empty boardwalks. Red Creek slept easy, a peace it hadn't known in years. In his room, Ashford cleaned his guns by lamplight. The Colt, the Winchester. Both had done their duty. He wiped them down carefully, oiled each moving part. It was a ritual, a reminder. These tools had kept him alive more times than he could count. They deserved respect. A knock came at the door. "Marshal?" Ridley's voice. "Got a minute?" Ashford opened the door and waved him in. Ridley looked exhausted, running on adrenaline and coffee. He held a telegram. "This just came in from the High Plains Marshals. Thought you should see it." Ashford read the message under the lamp. His expression stayed neutral, but something flickered behind his eyes. "They're calling you back," Ridley said. "Albuquerque, new assignment." Ashford folded the paper and slipped it into his vest. "That's how it goes. I go where I'm needed." "But Red Creek needs you," Ridley said. "The investigation's not finished. The trials haven't even started." "You'll handle it?" Ashford said calmly. "You've got the evidence, the witnesses. The prosecutor will see it through." He met Ridley's gaze. "You don't need me anymore." Ridley looked like he wanted to argue. Instead, he nodded and extended his hand. "It's been an honor, Marshal." Ashford clasped his hand firmly. "The honor's mine. You're a good lawman. This town's lucky to have you." He released his grip. "Just remember, justice isn't something you win once. It's something you protect every day. Stay honest. Stay alert. Don't let another Mortimer Crowell take root." "I won't," Ridley said. His voice held like an oath. "I swear it." After Ridley left, Ashford finished packing his saddlebags. He'd leave at first light, as always. He never stayed long enough to grow roots. That was the job. Ride in, clean the mess. Ride out before the dust settled. 30 years of borrowed beds and hotel rooms. 30 years of dawns seen from horseback. Sleep didn't come easily. Around 3 a.m, Wyatt Ashford sat by the window, watching Red Creek sleep. He thought about all the towns he'd passed through over the decades. How many he'd helped pull back from the edge, how many stayed clean, how many slipped back into rot once he rode on. There was no way to know. You did the work, then moved forward, trusting others to protect what you'd set right. Dawn came cold and clear. Ashford saddled his horse in the livery stable, a rangy bay gelding that had carried him across half the territory. The animal nicked softly, sensing the road ahead, another trail, another town, another fight. Outside the stable, Evan Ridley waited with a small gathering. Caleb Rowan, Martha Holloway, Hank Tolliver, and a dozen other members of the Red Creek kin. Word had spread that the marshal was leaving. They'd come to see him off, to say thank you one last time. Ashford swung into the saddle, settled the reins, and tipped the brim of his hat to the crowd. Then he looked to Ridley. "Keep the law strong, Sheriff," he said. "This town's counting on you." "Safe travels, Marshal," Ridley replied. "And thank you for everything." Ashford turned his horse and rode out of Red Creek just as the sun cleared the eastern mountains. Long shadows stretched across the dirt street. Behind him, the town woke. Shop doors opening, children running, life returning to a rhythm long strangled under Mortimer Crowell's rule. Now it breathed freely again. The road wound through sage and juniper, climbing toward the distant mesa. Ashford didn't look back. He never did. The job was finished. The law restored. What came next belonged to the people of Red Creek, not to him. His thoughts drifted to the telegram folded in his pocket. Albuquerque. A new assignment. Probably another crooked official. Another town bound by fear. The work never ended. Justice passed from one generation of lawmen to the next. Ridley would guard it in Red Creek. Ashford would carry it wherever the badge sent him. The sun climbed higher, warming his shoulders. His horse settled into an easy trot, eating up the miles. By midday, Red Creek was only a memory behind him. By nightfall, it would join the long list of towns he'd helped set right. Battles fought. Justice served. An eagle circled overhead, riding the warm currents above the mesa. Ashford watched it for a moment, free, solitary, powerful. He felt a kinship with the bird. Both hunters. Both servants of something larger than themselves. Both walking paths that never truly ended. The road stretched ahead, dissolving into heat and distance. Somewhere out there waited another town in trouble. Another man who believed himself untouchable. Another chance to uphold the law. Ashford would ride until he found it. That was the life he'd chosen 30 years earlier, and the life he would keep until the end. 3 weeks later, the trials began in Red Creek's newly restored courthouse. Everett Hale, brought in specifically for his reputation of absolute integrity, presided. The evidence against Mortimer Crowell and his network was overwhelming. Documents, sworn testimony, physical proof. The jury deliberated less than 2 hours. Crowell was sentenced to 25 years in territorial prison. Briggs Hollow received 15. The corrupt officials each drew terms ranging from 10 to 20 years. Vernon Slade survived his wound and was sentenced to life imprisonment. Death would have been too merciful for a lawman who betrayed his oath. Evan Ridley served as sheriff for 15 more years, retiring young to be with his family. He never forgot the lessons Ashford taught him during those 3 days. Never compromise, never look away, never let fear outweigh justice. Red Creek prospered under honest rule. Martha Holloway rebuilt her ranch with help from neighbors. It became one of the most successful spreads in the territory. Caleb Rowan worked there until he saved enough to claim land of his own. The town grew, drawing settlers who'd heard it was a place where the law meant something. Wyatt Ashford continued riding the territories for 5 more years, until age and old wounds finally slowed him. He retired to a small cabin in Colorado, living quietly, occasionally visited by lawmen seeking advice, or simply wanting to meet the legend. He died at 73, peacefully in his sleep. His funeral drew marshals, sheriffs, and rangers from across the West. They buried him with his badge, his colt, and full honors. The headstone read simply, Wyatt Ashford Marshal, he kept the law. In Red Creek, a plaque still stands in the town square, marking the 3 days when justice rode into town and stayed. Every lawman sworn in after that day took the oath standing before the plaque, reminded that a badge meant more than authority. It meant responsibility, honor, and the resolve to stand against corruption no matter the cost. Stories of the ghost of the territories spread through campfires and dime novels, growing larger with every retelling. But those who had truly known Wyatt Ashford remembered something quieter. A weary old marshal who did his work without noise or glory. A man who never bent when the right path was hard. One person who proved that standing firm for justice could still change the course of a town. Red Creek never forgot. The law held steady. The corruption never returned. And when the wind rolled through the canyons and whispered across the sage, Folks swore they could still hear boot heels on old boardwalks. The echo of an aging marshal making his endless rounds, watching over the places he'd set right and the people he'd protected. Justice, once planted, became its own inheritance, passed from Evan Ridley to his frontier wardens, then to the next generation, each adding a chapter to the story that began the night an old man sat down for a drink and refused to bow to a bully. The West changed. Towns grew into cities. The frontier tamed itself. But the spirit of men like Wyatt Ashford lived on. In every honest lawman, in every citizen who stood against corruption, in every soul who believed that right mattered more than power. That spirit became his true monument, not marble, not bronze, but a living tradition of justice, hard-won, carefully guarded, always watchful. And because of that, the ghost of the territories never truly faded. He rode on in every badge worn with integrity, in every law upheld with courage, in every small victory of right over wrong. Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. Thank you for giving your time to this story. Some journeys shape us, and we hope this one left a mark on your heart. There are more paths ahead, more legends of love, hardship, and redemption beneath the western sky. Please subscribe, leave your thoughts, and travel with us once again. Thank you, and God bless. Aviso legal. Disclaimer. The stories presented here are creative expressions and may mix historical inspiration with dramatized scenes. AI tools contribute to some elements of voice, imagery, and structure. But every published story is refined by editors and creators to ensure authentic emotional impact. We honor YouTube's policies and do not generate deceptive likenesses or artificial depictions of real people. All audiovisual components are legally licensed. Any use, redistribution, or alteration of this content must be granted through written consent. Your presence here means a lot. Thank you for supporting artistic storytelling.